The time is just gone 8:39 as we continue with our broadcast this morning, and we're going across to be joined by senior researcher Ashraf Patel. We're talking about threats to South Africa, and we've seen a U.S. senator that has called on to remove South Africa's trade benefits with the United States of America, and we're talking about duty-free access to the American market. And this is a result of South African relationship with Russia, with Iran, and with Palestine. Ashraf, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam, Inayat and listeners. Hope you all well.
Yes, Alhamdulillah, doing well. Obviously, we've seen these threats in the past with South Africa. We've just come through this whole AGOA summit as well, Ashraf. And already we're seeing noises coming out of the United States of America threatening South Africa in terms of our position we taking with regard to a number of issues. We know Russia was at the forefront, the whole relationship with Iran has always been an issue. And now with the genocide in Palestine, we see these threats coming again.
Yes, look, it's not surprising given the nature of the fractured geopolitical situation. We've had a post COVID world where one would have assumed more cooperation, and yet we're seeing more conflicts, and this has involved the major powers. Therefore, middle income countries like South Africa are caught in what is called geopolitical headwind. And as a result, there's enormous pressure, particularly from trading partners such as the US, to push South Africa in certain kind of policy directions. But that's not going to be easy because we do have democratic government, we do have some level of sovereignty, and we're also part of the powerful BRICS bloc, which gives us much more space to be more independent from these kind of threats.
Yes, we've seen some of the other African countries and those that will be losing their beneficiary status in 2024. Countries like the Central African Republic, Gabon, Niger, and also Uganda. These are countries that have actually been removed. But again, coming to South Africa for the reasons that you've mentioned, it may not be that easy to actually remove South Africa. South Africa is still a powerhouse economy. South Africa is still a force on the African continent, but also at the same time, South Africa, unlike Europe and many of the other countries that have given their support to the United States of America, particularly with all the aggression that is taking place in Palestine, South Africa will be treated differently. And obviously, we need to applaud some of our politicians as well for the bravery and the courage that they've shown in the face of all this adversity.
Yes, yes, you must remember, despite the shortcomings, the ANC government has generally taken a progressive international foreign policy rooted in the values of the liberation movement, the anti-colonial struggle. So those values are quite dominant in our foreign policy thinking. And, our partnership and inclusion within BRICS has given us considerable policy weight regionally and globally. And if you look at our trade, I mean, our trade with China, for instance, in the last decade has deepened fivefold, whereas trade with Europe and US, although it's still large, has sort of not improved at the level of, let's say, trade with the East. So there is a decisive geo-economic shift to the East and China in particular. And therefore, we have more diversity in terms of exports and imports. And so we can play in different spaces and regional blocks. And also, there's a lot of politicking, meaning that the US and South Africa are going into elections in 2024. So different politicians, political parties, senators, in the case of the US, would try and do a lot of saber rattling to try and and delay some of the AGOA benefits. So it's all about election politicking as well. That's one element to.
Yes, Ashraf. But also looking at the United States of America, they are no longer in a position to threaten from a position of power because internally within the United States of America, it is no longer the superpower economically. Looking at where China is and the American economy in itself is struggling. People on the ground are struggling, and by America playing this active role and getting actively involved in this genocide that is taking place together with Israel, it could come to bite them as well because when one looks at public opinion in the United States of America, looking at the heavy investment that America has made on Israel as well, and this is going to be to no avail. It's not going to come out to fruition as well because generally we'll see with all the protest action, the public opinion, people are talking about Biden not putting America first. They've got their own problems in terms of joblessness, in terms of healthcare, in terms of poverty, all of that playing out in the United States of America. So this time around, it's a very, very different ball game. So America can threaten as much as they want. They are not in that position of strength or power to threaten anymore.
Yes, yes. Look, they in the last 2 or 3 decades, the inequalities in the U.S. has increased. If you look at the latest auto worker strikes for several months, you begin to see lots of gaps in terms of the CEO class, the senior management and shareholder class, vis-a-vis the workers on the shop floor and communities, and that gulf is ever deepening. The health crisis in the U.S. with over 60 million people that are excluded from the health plan or Medicare. And so you begin to see major gaps and inequalities that's developing further and further. And so then the bigger question is, can the superpower status continue? And most of the scholars are saying no. You have a rise of China that in the same period has brought in 500 million Chinese into the middle class status. All of them enjoy a fairly good quality of life. They have access to education, infrastructure, technology, jobs. And so that model is proving to be far more palatable to the world and the global south. And also, China has not been involved in one international occupation or conflict in the last 75 years. Now, that speaks volumes in terms of the two superpowers and their different perspectives or civilizational perspectives to the world. The Chinese model is about development, about infrastructure, about trade, etc., about respecting the sovereignty of nations. And the US is the total opposite. And so, yes, there is a turning point and the shift towards the east. There's a geo-economic shift and geopolitical shift to the east and the south. So yes, these conflicts are literally exposing the kind of gaps in the West, in US in particular, as well as Europe.
Well, clearly, and I think even when all this blows over in Palestine and Gaza, there are many that are saying, Ashraf, that one of the biggest losers in all of this is going to be the United States of America.
Yes, yes, it's quite clear. Look, it's quite clear if you look at the news networks, the narratives, the global push of civil society for peace, for the ceasefire, and the total disregard of the US and some European members in the UN Security Council. It's quite clear that the warmongering and the military industry comes first, before people, before human rights. And even close allies are having doubts. The whole Middle East is kind of divided and you can see even nations like Turkey, which is part of NATO, is taking a different position than to the US and Europe. And Turkey is moving closer east politically. So these huge shifts in different sentiments. And it does show that, while These conflicts are taking place. Even every statement around human rights by the US is seen as hypocritical. So they can no longer defend their human rights foreign policy posture because it's exposed. Every decision they take at the UN Security Council is then shows up the kind of double standards on human rights, etc., etc. So yes, it's very interesting times and very tragic times.
Well, Ashraf, we're going to have to leave it at that. As always, Jazakallah for your time. We do appreciate you taking time out this morning with us on Salam Media. All the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Ashraf Patel, senior researcher, with us. And with that, we're going to go for a break. We come back. We will be covering next up an event that is taking place in Cape Town. This is United Against Genocide. This is a protest march that is taking place in Cape Town. We'll be joined by Humaira Collins.